everyone, this is Chahar. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'll be discussing the summary of lesson number 2, the address from the book Snapshots of Class 11. The chapter is written by Marga Minko and it's a true account. It's not a fictional one. So since it's a true account, it's important that we know something about her. Marga Minko was born in 1920 in a Jewish family. Like many other Jews, her family also had to face a lot of hardships during Hitler's regime. I think we all know that Hitler's Nazi party was anti-Jew. So when his Nazi party came into power, he, in a way, invaded Holland. They took over Holland, and many of the narrator's family members were captured. Hundreds of thousands of Jews, in fact. So along with all those people, the narrator's family members were also captured, arrested, and eventually killed. But she somehow escaped being arrested and went into hiding during the Second World War. During the Second World War, the Nazis under Hitler attacked Holland. Many Jews were killed. Those who remained alive had to leave Holland for fear, because they knew that if they would stay, probably they would also be killed. So they had to just flee, they had to run away. The narrator, Marga Minko, was one of those people who survived. The story describes her visit to Holland after the war, when she went back to her hometown in Holland in search of her mother's belongings. Obviously, her mother was now dead. She wasn't alive. So this is an important question, that why did she go back to Holland? So after the war ended, after many years, she went back to her hometown in search of her mother's belongings, to get back her mother's belongings, because she was very attached to her mother, and she just wanted to have her memories. When the narrator reached her hometown, she went to this address, 46 Marconi Street, in the hope of getting her mother's belongings. But obviously a long time had passed, so she wasn't quite sure of the address. But she remembered that this was the address, and the woman she wanted to meet was Mrs. Dorling. She didn't know her particularly, but she remembered this name, Mrs. Dorling, which her mother had told her. Mrs. Dorling opened the door and she showed no sign of recognition. Like I said, a long time had passed. So when she looked at the narrator, who was standing at her doorstep, she showed no sign of recognition at all. She didn't recognize the narrator, but the narrator recognized the green knitted cardigan Mrs. Dorling was wearing. So when she came, she wasn't sure about the address. She wasn't sure whether this woman was Mrs. Dorling, but now she was sure when she saw the woman wearing her mother's cardigan. It definitely belonged to her mother. She remembered that her mother used to wear this cardigan a lot, and the wooden buttons were rather pale from washing, but otherwise the cardigan looked quite the same. So it was a bit worn out now. It was quite old, but it looked otherwise it looked quite the same. When the woman saw that the narrator was looking at her cardigan, she half hid herself behind the door. So previously she didn't recognize the narrator, but when she saw her looking at her cardigan, so at that time she understood. Then she recognized, okay, she's she's that woman's daughter. Mrs. S was her mother's name. The narrator's mother's name was Mrs. S. So now she recognized her. So she hid behind the door. The narrator was now certain that she had come to the right place. So when she saw her gestures, she understood that she had come to the right place. The woman asked her if she had come back. The narrator replied, only she had come back. So, when the woman asked this question, when Mrs. Dorling asked this question that you've come back, it suggests that she wasn't expecting them to come back. She was quite surprised to see them alive. So, and when the narrator said that only I, it's just me who has come back. So this shows that all the other family members of her family were now dead and she was left alone. Mrs. Dorling was, like I said, rather surprised to see her alive because she thought they were all dead. Anyways, she refused to talk to the narrator and shut the door. Although she recognized her, but she pretended that, okay, I don't know who you are, and she refused to talk to her. Why did she refuse to recognize the narrator? Probably she feared that the narrator had come to take away all their belongings back. All the stuff that belonged to the narrator's family, but they had to leave it behind and just run away to save their lives. So, under the circumstances that they had to leave their hometown, their country, it wasn't possible for them to take the entire stuff with them, right? They could hardly take anything. So they had to leave everything behind. And that's why Mrs. Dorling refused to recognize the narrator, because the stuff that she had, a lot of stuff belonged to the narrator's family and she didn't want to return it. That was precisely the reason she refused to talk to the narrator, as she feared that the narrator had come back to take away her family's belongings, and obviously she had no intentions of returning that. So this is also an important question, that why did she pretend not to recognize her, or why did she refuse to recognize the narrator? So this is the answer, because she didn't want to return the stuff. Well, when Mrs. Dorling shut the door, the narrator looked at the nameplate again. The address was the same as her mother had told her. House number 46, Marconi Street. The narrator was now very sure that yes, she had come to the right address. When she read Mrs. Dorling's body language and everything, she became very sure of the address. But who was this Mrs. Dorling? Who was she, and how did she, have all their belongings? Well, Mrs. Dorling was an old acquaintance of the narrator's mother. Acquaintance means, just jaan pehchan wala, who is not, your friend. You just know a person's name. Sirf casual jaan pehchan is called acquaintance. For a long time, they were not in contact. Mrs. Dorling and the narrator's mother, they were not in contact for a long time, but Mrs. Dorling had just renewed contact with narrator's mother. Now this is a rewind, this is playback. This particular scene is of the time when they were still living in their house. So at that time, Mrs. Dorling had just renewed contact with narrator's mother when the situation started getting worse and worse after the Nazi invasion. She started paying regular visits to their house when this Nazi invasion started in their city. Every time she came to their house, she would take away some items from their house. Why did she take, and why did the narrator's mother allow her to take those items? Because Mrs. Dorling knew that since Nazis are arresting Jews, the narrator's family would have to flee sooner or later. They have to run away, she knew that. So she suggested to the narrator's mother that she would keep their things safe in case they had to leave the city and the country due to the war. And they could take back their items from her when they returned. So this was the reason that she had started coming to their house every day, because she was greedy. She wanted to have their stuff, and she was pretty sure that since Nazi people are arresting and killing Jews, so since this was a Jew family, Mrs. Dorling knew that they will also have to run away sooner or later. So she just wanted to take their stuff. But obviously, she had no intentions of returning those items, as she had thought that this family would never come back. She thought that they are not going to return. So in this way, Mrs. Dorling took away all their valuable possessions one by one, including their table silver, crockery, antique plates, their tea sets, candle holders, etc., etc. All the stuff which was quite dear to the narrator's mother, all this stuff was taken by Mrs. Dorling. So that was the reason that the narrator had come back. She had come back to take away her mother's belongings. Not that she wanted to possess the material things and all, but her mother's memories were attached with those things. So she was that was the only purpose of her visit. And it wasn't easy for her. It wasn't easy at all. It had taken a long time for the narrator to come to this point, to be ready to see all those things again, which would certainly evoke her mother's memories. Initially, she was reluctant. She didn't want to come. She wasn't ready for it. She didn't want to. She wasn't ready to face all those things. She wasn't ready to see all those things which had memories of her mother without her mother. But as the time passed by, she prepared herself for it, and she prepared herself to see all those things again without her mother. When Mrs. Dorling refused to recognize her, when she refused to talk to her, when Mrs. Dorling refused to talk to the narrator was quite disappointed. She decided to leave the place, but then she thought of trying once again. She thought of taking another chance. What happened at her second visit to the same address? Well, the narrator paid a visit to Mrs. Dorling's house a second time. This time, a girl of about 15 opened the door. She was Mrs. Dorling's daughter. She told the narrator that her mother had gone out for some work. She would be back soon, and she invited the narrator in. So obviously she decided to wait for her. The girl asked her to sit in the living room. When the narrator looked around, the room, there is a description of this room. The room had an unpleasant smell. It had a damp smell. Damp means, sealan jab aa jati hai. So that kind of smell is called damp smell. When the narrator looked around the room, she saw that the room was full of her mother's belongings. The woolen tablecloth, spoons, forks, knives, table silver, Hanukkah candle holders, candles, all these things looked quite out of place as they were tastelessly arranged. They had not arranged all this stuff in a proper way, so everything looked out of place. But still, all those things brought back her mother's memories. The narrator was horrified to see her mother's belongings in a place unknown to her. All the items looked out of place in this strange atmosphere. She couldn't relate to those items again. Old memories came flooding back to her. The narrator felt quite sad at the underestimated value of her mother's belongings, because when these items were in their house, her mother used to arrange them so tastefully. They all looked so good. But now old memories came flooding back, and these items were looking very awkward, very out of place. It was now time for the narrator to catch her train. The girl asked her if she didn't want to wait for her mother. but the narrator replied that she must go. While leaving their house, the narrator looked up at the nameplate again. 46 Marconi Street. Yes, the address was correct, but now the narrator didn't want to remember it anymore. She decided not to go back there because the narrator, she decided not to go back there because she couldn't bear the sight of familiar objects in this strange surroundings. Also, she had no place to keep them as she had only a small rented room. But that was not the main reason. The most important reason, the narrator decided to forget the past and move on in life. She didn't want to link her mother's memories with these material objects. She realized that her mother's memories are in her heart. She doesn't need these material objects, to remember her mother. With these the value of these material objects was lost for her. So she decided to leave her past behind, to leave these material things related to her past behind, and she decided to move on in life. That was the most important decision that she took. So that's all. This is all about it. The theme and the message. The story brings out the sufferings of people during wars. So when war of any kind happens, people suffer. So it brings out that aspect, but it gives a very strong message also that we should not hold on to the past. We should let bygones be bygones. We should leave the past behind and we shouldn't allow it to adversely affect our present or determine our future. It must be overcome at any cost. So no matter what happens, we should always move on in life. That's the major, message that it delivers, that it conveys. That's all, students. I hope you must have understood the chapter. If you like the video, if you found it useful, then please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. And yes, you can also leave comments.